Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Rolling Hills Soul Care Podcast. My name is Jazzy, and I'm here with Chuck. How are you today, Chuck?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. We're going to revisit one of my favorite of your blog posts, actually, number 92 today. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Awesome.
It's called A Sea of Life or Death.
All right.
So here's what I wrote. If you've ever been to Israel or studied maps of this special land, you know that there are two bodies of water within the country referred to as seas, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. One is life-giving, one is dead. What's the difference in these two bodies of water that are separated by only 65 miles and created by the same water source? Well, water from snowmelt on Mount Hermon, just north of Israel, runs down and feeds the beautiful streams and rivers that eventually become the Jordan River and pour into the Sea of Galilee, a body of water that thrives with fish, birds, and other wildlife. From the other end of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River carries its life-giving water for about 65 miles through the fertile Jordan Valley, past ancient Jericho, and into the Dead Sea. Unlike the fresh water of its northern neighbor, the Dead Sea is salt water, almost 10 times saltier than the ocean, which makes for a very harsh environment where plants and fish cannot thrive. Hence the ancient Hebrew name, Sea of Death. Yes, the area of the Dead Sea contains salts and other minerals that contribute to this condition, but there's one key difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. There is no outlet from the Dead Sea. Water flows in, but it doesn't flow out. I think these two bodies of water offer us a spiritual life lesson. God doesn't pour life-giving spiritual water into our souls for us to store up just for ourselves. Instead, like the Sea of Galilee, as we are fed by a source outside of ourselves, we also allow this life-giving water to flow out of us to others. In his book, The Unhurried Leader, author Dennis Fadling quotes a 12th century monk whose words are just as true today as when he first shared them. The one who is wise, therefore, will see their life as more of a reservoir than a canal. The canal simultaneously pours out what it receives. The reservoir retains the water till it is filled, then offers the overflow without loss to itself. Fadling's book also references Ezekiel 47, where God gave the prophet a vision of a future temple out of which flows an ever-expanding river. That river flows on out through the wilderness into the Dead Sea and heals what is broken, refreshes what is dry, and brings life to what is dead. The imagery is of God in his temple, providing an everlasting and ever-increasing source of life-giving water. God is the source, not us. But we can be filled with that water and then share it with others. It's exciting to know that one day God will make the Dead Sea spring back to life. But for now, I think we're being called to be like the Sea of Galilee, where we are so filled with his life-giving love that it pours out of us into the world around us.
Thank you so much for that, Chuck. I really loved that blog post because it was full of things that I did not know. I love the science lesson about why the Dead Sea is the way that it is, but also I was unfamiliar with Ezekiel 47, to be very honest about my big gap in Bible knowledge, and I love the image of that being restored to God's original intent of giving life. I think that's awesome. I love that we're back to the reservoir illustration again, because it's such a encouraging picture of, the reservoir just collects all the stuff and it doesn't have to work, doesn't have to reach out and fly. It just pours over the sides and pours out to where it needs to be. And I think that's such a wonderful picture of God working through us if we just trust him to sit and collect and then provide those opportunities to pour into others. Which brings me to two questions that I have that feel fairly rudimentary, but also sort of practical. So, if we're going to continue with the reservoir imagery, there are times like, especially around here in the summer where there's very little rain and lots of sun and heat, and the reservoir actually can get low. And doesn't have water all the way to the top. I mean, what is something that what do we do if our reservoir is low and we feel like we legit don't have anything to pour out?
Well, that would be a question of what are we connected to as our source. When physical reservoirs run dry, it's because the source of water for them has diminished. We don't have that problem with God. And so while you can think about that as well, shoot, what if my reservoir looks like, I grew up in Southern California where many rivers were just concrete-lined, dry things. And you would say, well, that's not a very good picture for me. Picture instead, almost a glacier-fed river, where you look and you see the abundance of this water source, and you know that's not going to run out. God is many, many, many more times more capable of keeping us filled. So it's really more of a condition of, what am I doing? Am I doing anything to cut that supply off, which will cause my tank to go down?
Right.
Versus there's something wrong with God's supply. God is quite capable of keeping our reservoir full if we allow him to.
That is a very excellent way of framing it, because I, my little human self, do have a tendency to be like, man, what's wrong? How come my reservoir's low? So
well, and those things happen. And so don't hear me say all Christians should have a full tank all the time.
Oh, no, I don't think anyone heard that.
And,
but refocusing where I'm
some people
filling.
I have tremendous respect for. They are people I love dearly. Have gone through. They've burned themselves out, typically by giving so much of themselves. That what I guess you might say is that their outflow was greater than what they were allowing to begin. That's part of that rest that's so important. And taking time to spend time with God to fill our tank, that didn't make them bad people. It made them busy people, caring people. In many cases, most cases, they were loving people and taking on their burdens. Some people call it compassion fatigue. It's hard if you're an empathetic person who cares and are engaged with, as many of our pastoral staff are, to not begin to have your tank depleted. That's why it's so important for all of us to remember
the source.
I got to go back to the source and make sure I'm not doing something to shut that supply off. Otherwise, my tank will run out.
Right. My second question, I feel like you pretty much almost answered it, was, again, very rudimentary. Like, seriously, I need examples. What does it mean to love on others and to pour that out to others? But it also sounds like that's a matter of the source.
Well, it is. I mean, God, if you look, Jesus summarized loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Loving God and loving others as you love yourself is the essence of the law and the prophets. Jesus summarized love God, love others. And to me, that's a recipe for how do I keep my reservoir full. Love God and keep the gate open to the source that's spiritually filling my tank, and then keep the other outlet open
as well
to let that spill out. And that looks, I mean, that's going to be a wide variety of things. Taking time to listen to somebody, praying with somebody, helping them move.
Speaking of examples.
Go help them paint, sit with them in the hospital. Just what does love look like? Well, it looks like God, and how he cares and pours himself and sacrificed himself for us. He's not asking us literally to die for people, and yet there are people I would die for. But all of that is to say that love God and allow Him to fill you, and then look for ways to pour that love out into others. And those opportunities come much more frequently than I often allow them to be acted upon. And we just need to be sensitive to those promptings. I will tell you that visually, and some of the reason I wrote this blog is I've been to Israel. I entered Israel for the first time in the southern part of the country, and it's not a very big country, but its geography is strikingly different.
Really?
And very dry in the south, and especially out near where the Dead Sea is. I've been in the Dead Sea. It's a very interesting. I mean, you cannot not float.
That's the one where you go and you just float,
yes.
right?
I mean, you will float. Right? If you think you, I mean, you can almost get into a sitting position and float. It is a striking contrast to where you get up north, and it's green and lush, and water is flowing from Mount Hermon, and this was in May. So I mean, there's snow on those on that mountaintop, and that water is rushing down, and so to stand in the southern area and to see how quickly it turns to desert, and then you see in Ezekiel 47 that God has a plan
for that,
where water begins to flow from this temple and spreads out, and it doesn't just go to the Dead Sea; it actually splits. But just to have stood and imagined these very barren lands that are brought back to life, and that very dead sea brought back to life, is exciting to think about. And to me, it gives me a tiny glimpse of what's available to me as we are able to give spiritual life to people by pouring out, what's poured into us, giving that back and giving it to others.
That is a really, really beautiful picture. So I thank you for planting that today.
You're welcome.
If you would like to revisit this blog or any of the others that Chuck has written, you can go find those at rollinghills.org/worship. That's where all these posts are. And you can also follow RH Worship on Instagram. There's a plethora of information there. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Chuck, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jazzy.